So let's talk about what it takes to get data into FlyQ EFB. The first thing, of course, is to go from whatever tab you're on to the Flights tab at the bottom of the screen. If you see a list of flights already there when you look under the My Flights tab, then you already have some flights. And that's because the first way to get data into this version of FlyQ is, frankly, to do nothing. FlyQ EFB since version 3.0 has had a built-in flight recorder. Any flight that you took using any version of FlyQ since 3.0 was introduced should be automatically recorded and available to you. Now, it may be that some of those flights don't have a takeoff and landing airport, which is exactly correct, and I'll show you how to edit those later. But generally speaking, the data should be there. Now, one thing to check, of course, first is to do two things to make sure that things are set up correctly. One is to go to the Settings button towards the top of the screen, scroll it down until you see the item in Preferences that says Automatically Record Flights. By default, it's on. If you turned it off, this would probably be a great time to turn it back on. That way, when the system senses that you're moving fast enough to be flying, it turns on the recorder, and in fact, it actually backs up about 30 seconds to pick up a bit of your takeoff roll. It also automatically stops recording when your speed goes below 20 knots for something like 30 seconds. So it's a very, very easy way. You don't have to actually remember to turn the recorder manually on or off. If you did choose to turn the recorder on and off, though, the way that you would do that, or if you just want to check that the recorder is actually happening, is to look at the status indicators in the upper right corner of the screen. There are 5 of them. If a recording is in progress, the indicator, and it's not right now on my screen, but if you take a look at the status indicators on the upper right, the button that says REC on the far right of the screen would be green, meaning a recording is going on. You can also tap on any of those buttons, it doesn't matter which, and go down. It begins usually GPS, select Flight Recorder, and it tells you whether or not it's recording. You can also, if you choose to, manually begin the recording by hitting the Start button. Once you hit Start, of course, it will automatically, it will stop manually as well too. Generally speaking, though, we suggest not using manual because, frankly, everyone's human and you're very likely to forget to record a flight. So just keep on using the automatic one. The other setting to keep in mind is which tail number is being used to record the flight. In FlyQ EFB, you can have more than one tail number. You can have more than one plane configured with a different tail number. The system doesn't use your flight plan to record the tail number because very often people fly without a flight plan. Rather, it uses your default aircraft to record that. So how do you know what your default aircraft is? If you only have one, of course, that is your default. If not, if you have more than one aircraft configured, select the Settings button, scroll down a little bit to the section that says Flight Planning, and select from Aircraft Profiles. You will see a list, almost certainly much shorter than my list, but you'll see a list of all the different aircraft that you've configured. If you take a look at the top item, it has a checkbox next to it. The one with the checkbox is always on top, and that is in fact your default aircraft. If you want to change that, say for example I want to make this Beech 33 Bonanza my default, I simply tap on it to go into the details for that plane and I hit the button, which I'm not going to do, that says Set Default. That's all you would do. Okay, so at this point, I'll go back to the screen. Everything is now configured for automatic recording. So the automatic recording is what generated most of these flights. So now let's take a look at another way to get data into FlyQ EFB's logbook. To do that is quite simple using our web-based flight planner. It's called FlyQ Online, and you get to it by going to the URL flyq.seattleavionics.com and logging in using the same email address and password that you use in FlyQ EFB. Or you can create your own new account here if you wanted to. Remember that FlyQ Online is a full-service web-based system that gives you airport information, it gives you detailed weather information, including things like nearby weather, 7-day forecasts, gives you flight planning, fuel prices, or have a flight plan loaded. But to get data into it from a logbook, it's quite simple. You go to the Settings button. Settings is on the corner, on the upper right corner by your name. It's the gear icon, just like Settings is the gear icon in FlyQ EFB on the iPad. Tap on that, scroll down the list just a little bit, and take a look at the visual logbook. As it says, imports from MyFlightbook, from ForeFlight, and from FlyQ itself. And of course, we're open to putting in additional imports. So if you have a logbook created in some system that you don't see here, please just send an email to support@seattleavionics.com and we'd love to take a look. But here's how you import it. Simply hit the button that says Import Logbook. There are two things here. One is to just hit a button that says click to select a file. You also have a few options though. If you want to, you can skip likely duplicates, and you can tell it optionally when to begin in terms of start and end date. The system will automatically not import absolute duplicates with other log entries already in the system. However, if FlyQ EFB maybe used its internal data recorder to import a flight, and also you did a manual entry into, say, MyFlightbook or into the ForeFlight logbook system, then you may have things that are approximate duplicates, but not exactly because there's no flight track to compare. That's what the box that says skip likely duplicates means. Basically, it means if you have another flight that same day to and from those two same airports, it will assume it's a duplicate and not import it. You can also tailor the range of the import by typing in a start date and end date. If you leave those blank, it'll import all the log entries in the entire file that you import. If you want more details, like for example, if you have a file that you created yourself and you want to see how to format it so FlyQ can import it, you can click the link that says File Format Details, and it tells you that on the side. Basically what fields are required, which fields are optional, and how to format it. But now, let's just import a log file. So the button that says click to select a TXT or a CSV file, click on that. Find wherever your logbook is. In this case, this is a logbook that will import from ForeFlight. We'll hit choose. And now it says processing. This may take a bit. This could take 15-20 seconds, sometimes a little bit more if you have a very long log file. But in this case, it's already done. Up pops a little report. It tells you when it was run, what the input format was. It tells you how many records were imported. It looks like 126. One, however, was not imported, and then it didn't skip any because of duplicates. You also see a warning, like now it tells you on line 140 that the takeoff and landing airport was missing. A warning means it did import the line. It just warns you about something that may be a little bit incorrect. An error, on the other hand, is telling you that essential information is missing. So it turns out on line 140, whatever that record is, the tail number, the end number, was also missing, and that one is a non-starter. If you don't have a tail number, we can't import it. It tells you the line number, so you can go back to the logbook and correct an error if you need to. Also, do notice that if the original logbook that you're importing happens to have blank lines between entries, which we find on some of the logbooks that we've seen, the line number references here have already removed all of the blank lines, so the line number reference may be a bit off. And of course, we would strongly suggest that you email support@seattleavionics.com if you try to import a file, you have a problem, or you think there's something that we didn't import correctly. We'd love to hear from you to correct that. So that's how you can very quickly get a lot of logbook entries into FlyQ EFB, whether you're using a logbook from MyFlightbook, from ForeFlight, or conceivably any other file format. Finally, the other way to get data into the system is to manually make an entry. In other words, not use the automatic data recorder. Doing that is also quite simple. In the upper right corner of the screen, below the status indicators, is a plus button. Hit plus. That means add. When you type in add, when you hit the add button, you then are in edit mode automatically in the data tab, which is a data entry screen of the logbook. First thing you notice is it'll say something like afternoon flight on whatever day it is. That's a name. So you can make that name into whatever you like. So you can just make that something like Burger Run with John, something like that. Then it has a section for a subtitle, or what you might call a description. A description isn't exactly the same as a remarks element, which is down a little bit later below. The remarks in the lower section is what you usually use to put in the official remarks that go into a logbook. Something like 3 touch and goes, flying with instructor so-and-so, landed at whatever field, practiced slow flight and stalls, whatever that kind of thing is. The description is more of a kind of a casual, descriptive, maybe kind of a social thing that you would put on there. Something like, had a great flight with John, he even paid for lunch, blah, 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 something like that. So it's optional, you don't have to do that. One advantage to typing in the name, by the way, as opposed to leaving it as what the automatic data recorder defaults to, is that is searchable later. So if you type in something like Burger Run with John as a name, later on, if you want to search for a particular flight, you can type in Burger or John, something like that. So it makes it easier to find. On manual data entry, you should also add in a from, which is of course your takeoff airport, and a to, your landing airport. Those, you can actually type anything you want to there. So you don't have to type in an airport identifier. It's probably useful if you take off from, say, Paine Field, which is an identifier of PAE, to actually type PAE, or with a K if you like. Doesn't really matter. As far as the from goes, you can type in, again, anything you like, but it's typically an airport identifier. The distance field, if you know the distance approximately that you flew, it's probably a good idea to do that. So say it's a 53.8 nautical mile flight, and that took you, 58 minutes. Type in for the duration here. Now, a couple of other notes is that there's a duration field down down a little bit lower that's a little bit different. The duration field here is more the actual clock time in high resolution, meaning in hours, minutes, seconds, kind of human readable. Down here, there's another duration field. The data recorder will automatically synchronize these two, but this is a standard kind of duration that you put into a logbook, which is in hours and tenths of an hour. So in this case, that would actually just be 1.0, because 58 minutes is, of course, rounded, would be rounded to 1 hour exactly. So those two don't necessarily have to be the same. You do have the ability to enter them separately. And again, the automatic data recorder will synchronize them, although you can change them independently. Another element on the field that you should take a look at is the switch that says private. The private switch is now off. What does that mean? Generally speaking, this has to do with the way that you set up your sharing on social media. So if you allow the system to share your flights with select other people, and again, there's a whole other video on that, but if you allow people to see other flights, they will generally see all of the flights. However, if there's a particular flight that you don't want anyone else to see, not a problem at all, you simply turn on private, just like that. So you can't do this until after the flight is recorded, but that's all that you need to do. So a very simple way to keep all your flights private. So looking through the general category, the first item is aircraft ident. That's your tail number. Again, that is what's pre-filled by the default aircraft that you select by going to Settings, again, just as a reminder, going to Settings, and then Aircraft Profiles. So the default aircraft is what's used there to set up your tail number. The aircraft type is automatically filled in from that same data. So if you select the C-172, you get an aircraft type of C-172. Aircraft category, you can pick from whatever is appropriate, single engine, multi-engine, sea, helicopter, glider, whatever it may be. The system will default to single engine land, however. Hob's time is optional, so if you want to record when Hob started, when Hob's ended, you can type that in. The takeoff and landing, again, when you just hit the plus button to create a random default, it assumes one takeoff and 1 day landing. If you also did a full stop landing at night, you can add that quite easily. One thing to keep in mind is that the night, and you can type in data for different conditions. So for example, if you took off a little late in the afternoon, so that half of this was at night, you can type in 0.5 hours at night. If, say, 0.1 of this was in actual instrument conditions, you can type that in. So you have the ability to type in whatever flight conditions are applicable. You also can type in the time. Again, the automatic data recorder will automatically fill in whatever your duration is that it calculates as time in PIC. It doesn't have to be. Obviously, you don't always spend all your time as PIC, but most of the time you do. So that's what the default is. If you're a student pilot, you would type in the appropriate value for dual received. If you're a CFI giving a student a lesson, you would type in the value for as CFI right there. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. So any of those fields can be edited. Do remember to hit the button that says Save in the upper right corner. If you just hit the button that says Flights to go backwards, it won't save it. So make sure to hit the Save button in the right corner, like that. Oh, and as you can see, I forgot to type in the field. That's fine. So let's say this is Paine to Renton. Save. Now that's saved. When I hit Flight, you see that back on the list. Now notice one thing though. You see the burger run with John, and then the graphic in the middle says log entry but no track. That's just like an imported log file in that the flight recorder didn't record the latitude, longitude, and time of each point in your flight, so it is literally just what it says. It is a log entry just like in a paper logbook, but there's no track. If that's what most of your logbook is, by the way, instead of all that space being used to just say log entry but no track, you may want to go to the upper right corner and select the list button, which is a button that looks like lines with it. It's like this. That makes the list much more compact. You can see a lot more flights. If, however, you have a lot of flights which are graphical in nature, which the flight recorder used, it's probably easier to see a graphical representation of the flight like that. So that's entirely up to you. Okay, so let's talk about editing a flight. You can edit a flight to your heart's content, which is your flight. Let's go to the flight following tab though, because I do want to show you something. If you go to flight following and you see a flight that someone else took, say for example Jeff Mersabasi, if I tap on the item for Jeff, I'm not Jeff, notice that in the upper right corner of the screen there is no edit button. That's where it would be if it were my flight. So whether you're in the flight following tab or in my flights, it doesn't matter. If it's your flight, for example, let's find one for me. Which would be a good one to edit. Let's say this one right here. So if I tap on this flight, notice the edit button. What do you do if you want to change something about the flight? Like if, for example, the title afternoon flight 7/19/2019 isn't particularly descriptive. Go to the data tab, tap on edit, and make that something a little bit more interesting. Make it something like scenic flight with Elia or something like that. Very easy to do. And again, since we're now in edit mode, we can change anything about this. So we can enter a description. So you can say something like first flight with her. If in fact you think the distance is closer to 10 miles, you can edit that field and say 10. You can make a remark if you want to. You could say something like 2 touch and goes. Hobbs time, etc. Hopefully you can correct that, but you get the idea. 2 touch. One thing to keep in mind, by the way, about the recorded flights, the recorded flight system doesn't try to guess how much your flight was done during night time. So in the case of recorded flight, it will record the takeoff and landings always as 1, by the way. So if that wasn't correct, if there was a touch and if there was a full stop, something like that, you would have to change those numbers manually. Also, again, with night, if half of the flight was, say, at night, the system wouldn't automatically record that. It will count all of your flight time as daytime, so you would need to manually adjust that to put the number of hours of the flight at night were there. Same thing with instrument or flight simulator, a number of instrument approaches. The flight recorder has no idea about any of this, so you would have to make those changes manually. Same kind of thing again with if you weren't PIC, if you're, for example, dual received, you could do something, although I guess that'd still be PIC. Any other value there you'd be typing in manually. That's in edit mode. And again, when you're modifying an existing flight, remember that you have to hit that save button in the upper right corner. I'm in fact going to do that. So now when we go back to the flight by hitting the flight button, notice that the text changes. Now it says scenic flight with Elia. First flight with her is now the description. Okay, pretty simple. Let's talk a little bit about comments also. So for example, when you take a look at this particular flight, notice that someone also named Steve Podrachik with a different icon. It's my evil twin here. Someone else made a comment on that flight. If for some reason I don't like that comment, I can edit the comment by tapping here. And next to the comment, there are a series of 3 dots. It's kind of a way of saying do something here, or a menu button. When I tap on the menu, notice I have the option to delete the comment. Now, although they both say Steve Podrachik on there, again, these are kind of 2 different personas that I created just for testing. So this particular Steve Podrachik with the green SP is not the same one who owns the flight, which is Stephen T. Podrachik. Therefore, I can't edit this comment because I didn't create it, as it were. I can delete a comment made by anyone, but I can't edit the comment. So if I want to delete that one, I just tap on delete. Confirm that I really did in fact want to delete it. When I go back to flights, notice it's missing. On the other hand, if I want to make a comment on someone else's flight, they are fully, or someone's endorsement, by the way, that's fully editable. So for example, let's say that I go down to this flight that my friend Jeff made. If I go here and I want to add a comment, I can just go to the comments tab and type in something like, awesome flight, whatever it may be, post it. When I go back, I see the comment that I made. You see my photo next to it. And if I want to edit or delete that, since I made the comment, I own the comment. So I can tap on it, and when I hit the three dot buttons, it not only has delete, it has edit as well. So if I, for example, want edit, I could say, awesome flight, but why didn't you invite me? Now it's edited. And of course, if I want to fix a typo, I could do that too. But you get the idea. So that's generally the kind of editing that you can make. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can delete flights that you make. You can't delete someone else's. So again, as an example here, let's take this flight that I just created, Burger Run with John. If I hit the button, which is called the action button, it's towards the right, top right of any particular flight. I see a number of choices to share the image, to email it, to print it, and so on. But at the very bottom is an item that says delete. I can hit delete here and delete that flight. On the other hand, though, if I go down to a flight that, say, Jeff Mirzapazzi made, if I tap the same button, notice that the delete option is not available. You can't delete someone else's flight. Also, in terms of deleting a flight, you can also do it from, if you're looking at the details of the flight, you have this option here too, and you can say delete, just like that. Okay, so that's generally how you edit a flight, how you create a flight, how you can either automatically create it with a flight recorder, you can import it using the FlyQ online website, or manually create the flight.